I am Cantor David Barash, and on behalf of our clergy, our staff, and all of Congregation Emmanuel B'nai Jeshurun, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all here this evening. Before we begin formally, I'd like to ask anybody if you have a cell phone or a pager to maybe check and make sure that it's off or silent. I think it will help with the evening. We are honored to host this event, and I'm delighted to introduce the co-chairs of this evening's program, Barbara Cole-Spiro and Felissa Lee. So please join me as we give them a warm, warm welcome.
Good evening. I'm Felissa Lee. And you are?
I am Barbara Cole-Spiro.
We're so happy to serve as the co-chairs for the 4th Annual Edie Edelman Speaker Event, which brings a distinguished speaker every year to speak about current events or political issues. Welcome and thank you so much for coming out on a Monday night to be here with us. And welcome also to our special guest speaker, Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove. And we're so looking forward to your talk with us about Israel and leading that conversation. We also want to thank Andrea Schneider, who is the board chair for the Milwaukee Jewish Federation and was key in bringing our fine speaker to be with us. So thank you very much.
All right, I'm going to continue with the thank yous. This wonderful event is brought to you by the Women's Philanthropy, Philanthropy and Israel Center of the Milwaukee Jewish Federation and the Edie Edelman Political Awareness Fund of the Jewish Community Foundation. I want to thank the people in the office that worked so hard to make this event the success that it is with all of you here. And that is Hannah, Ashley, and Amy. Thank you, all of you. And then, this is a proof of if you will it, it will be. Andrea, maybe a couple years ago, I found out that Elliot was related to Andrea, sister-in-law married to Debbie. And I was so excited because in the Jewish world, to me, there are many great thinkers, but modern thought, Elliot Cosgrove and Jonathan Sacks, who is in England. Those two are giants. And here we are. We're going to have just a great evening and discussion. The other thing I want to talk about is Edie Edelman, who was a pillar of our community, sowed so many seeds that are still blooming. Political awareness, 40-year-old Bible study. Not only that, for me, and I was young once, she was my mentor. I grew up with her 3 sons. I was just saying, I dated 2 of them. Great parties at their house. But when I became involved in the Jewish community, Edie was going to Israel, wanting to study Bible, wanting to study Hebrew. Such a strong, beautiful, curious, intelligent woman. And here we are today. She's still very much alive. And so, Edie, I thank you. Great, great woman. And in an era that was so important. We were in Israel many times together, the Jewish agency meetings, and she was so effective. So, with that, you're next.
Thanks, Barbara and Felissa. This is a great audience. We have people from all over the community, and I think some outside of our Jewish community. To hear a speaker, let me tell you, I've heard him before, it's a wonderful treat. And it represents the core of what we do at the Federation. For those of you who don't know, I'm Hannah Rosenthal, and I am the CEO of the Milwaukee Jewish Federation. And we love our role for the community of bringing people together, of trying to handle topics that we need some guidance on. And so that's what we're doing today. We raise money to support a network of agencies in our city, in our community. We also have a foundation, a $200 million foundation, where in addition to the planning we do for the community with the network of agencies, we also give lots more money to causes that come to us and are in need of often emergency funding. So we welcome the opportunity to deal with a topic that is difficult for most communities. And I'm a little jealous, no, my sister told me, I'm a little envious of the people who get to hear you every week. I do sometimes online listen to you, because to handle the current state of affairs on this side of the ocean and on that side of the ocean, we need to hear from a lot of different people. And so whatever follows what Elliot says will be very interesting to hear what you have to add. And this honors the vision of someone who was very, very dedicated to politics, to rights for all women, rights for all people. And this lecture series in Edie Edelman's name is a wonderful legacy that we all get to appreciate. So thank you for coming. And Eileen Graves, who is the head of Women's Philanthropy, will take the bima.
Thank you, Hannah. Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Barbara and Felissa, for co-chairing tonight's event, and for Barbara for sharing such beautiful recollections of Edie Edelman, and to the Israel Center and Congregation Emmanuel B'nai Jeshurun for their partnership. So my name is Eileen Graves, as you heard, and I am the president of Women's Philanthropy for the Milwaukee Jewish Federation. Women have a proud and distinguished history as leaders in our Jewish community. Women's Division, now known as Women's Philanthropy, has produced campaign chairs and board chairs for the Federation and other community agencies, and has had a strong presence in the national level as well. Women's Philanthropy has always played an integral role in ensuring the success of our community campaign, raising 1/3 of the campaign total each year. For many decades, our dedicated volunteers have worked hands-on to meet vital community needs and have provided a rich variety of programming to enrich all of our lives. And a beautiful example of this is the Edie Edelman Political Awareness Series, which became the Edie Edelman Speaker Event. So before I have the privilege of introducing our speaker tonight, housekeeping. I think when you came in, you got a card for writing questions for Rabbi Cosgrove. As you listen to his talk, if you have a question, please jot it down, and we'll collect it after Rabbi Cosgrove speaks for the Q&A portion of the program. So if you have not received the card, you can raise your hand and we'll come around and give it to you. Anybody? No. Okay. Over here. Okay. Someone will be there. Eve, someone will come. So it is my personal honor to introduce tonight's speaker, Rabbi Cosgrove. Despite the fact that we have never met until this evening, I have had a long-standing relationship with him built on respect for his passion, his intellect, and his keen insights into Jewish life today. His sermons are inspirational and thought-provoking. He has the wonderful ability to teach the Torah portion and connect it to our lives for meaningful action and practice. Together, we've attended Ufrufs and birthday celebrations, and including 100th birthday celebrations and B'nai mitzvahs, and most recently, your son's bar mitzvah. And what a beautiful celebration it was, Mazel Tov. And can I just say how adorable he is? Oh my gosh. My personal connection to Rabbi Cosgrove and his family deepened as I heard his son speak about Camp Ramah and the Friendship Circle. I too am a Ramanic and a mother whose children were involved with Friendship Circle. So you might ask yourself, if I live in Milwaukee and he's the rabbi at the Park Avenue Synagogue in New York City, what is she talking about? Well, let's just say he was immediately recognizable to me from the left-hand side. You see, I'm thankful for Park Avenue Synagogue's live streaming video camera. As you heard, Rabbi is the brother-in-law of our Milwaukee Jewish Federation chair, and I was able to have a great view of Andrea and Rod kvelling during Jed's bar mitzvah. So as we all know, the Jewish world gets smaller all the time. Rabbi Cosgrove is quoted in our Women's Philanthropy Annual Luncheon Speaker book, Abigail Pogrebin's My Jewish Year, 18 Holidays, One Wandering Jew. And it's very fitting that he is quoted under the chapter of Yom HaAtzmaut, Israeli Independence Day. And 2 years ago, our Edie Edelman speaker, Seth Siegel, who wrote the book Israel's Solution to a Water-Starved World, Let There Be Water, is a congregant of Rabbi Cosgrove's, as well as a dear friend and our dear friend. So I guess we're like mishpacha. So now to tell you about our speaker's accomplishments, which are so many, but here goes. In 1999, he was ordained at the Jewish Theological Seminary and subsequently earned a Ph.D. at the University of Chicago Divinity School. He's the senior rabbi of Park Avenue Synagogue since 2009. He serves on the executive board of the Rabbinical Assembly and New York Board of Rabbis. He's an advisor on interfaith affairs for the Anti-Defamation League and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. As if that isn't enough, he's the author. Oh, did I leave the book? Oh, no, here it is. He's the author of 9 volumes of sermons. I happen to have Hineni. And the editor of Jewish Theology in Our Time. So, with no further ado, let's give Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove a warm Milwaukee welcome.
Thank you, Eileen. That was very gracious. Thank you. Eileen, thank you so much for those warm and gracious words, and what a warm welcome it is. I want to thank all of the professionals who have made this evening possible, to Amy Blumenthal, to Ashley Lund, to Hannah, who 10 years ago we were co-billing at an Avodah fundraising event. It is great to connect and see you thriving here in Milwaukee. I want to thank our co-chairs, to Barbara and Felisa. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. And of course, to our hosts here, to Cantor Barash, for opening up your beautiful community. I know that Rabbi Berkson would have wanted to be here, and please let him know that on behalf of me, Debbie, our deepest condolences on the passing of the Rebbitzin. May her memory be for a blessing. And of course, to all those who have made the Edie Edelman series possible, educating women on politics, on government, on advocacy and engagement. It's an honor here to talk about difficult issues, to talk about important issues on the year of Israel's 70th, to talk about the relationship between North American Jewry and Israel, where it's been and where it is going. I'd be remiss if I didn't also begin in my remarks by thanking my beloved sister-in-law, Andrea Schneider. the combination of nepotism and fear of Andrea that brought me here tonight. There are few people that a man fears more than the sister of his wife, and the combination of snarky banter and repartee that to have it, and which only insists that I thank one more person in the room, and that is the person who is married to Andrea and has to deal with my wife, Rod Schneider. Thank you, Rod. So let's get going. And I know we're on the... What does it mean when a rabbi takes off his watch? Absolutely nothing. So I want to begin a discussion on Israel in a very unusual place. And for those of you who download music, who stream music, I want you to think about the music that you download. Think about the music that you are streaming or downloading on your computer. I read an interesting article on the subject, and I promise you this will connect, I hope, that Seth Davidowitz wrote in the New York Times just a few short weeks ago. Apparently in this age of big data, they are able to track your age, when you were born, and who downloads what songs at what frequency by way of demographics. So, for instance, Roy Orbison's Pretty Woman is downloaded most by women approximately in the age of 69, meaning they were 17 at the time of its 1964 release. Van Morrison's Crazy Love is downloaded most by men at the age of 63, who were approximately 17 at the age of that song's release. The Cure's Just Like Heaven is downloaded most by, anyone want to take a guess? Women in their 40s who were teenagers at the time of its 1987 release. So what's this to say? This is to say that our tastes at a certain moment in our life stabilize. That what we listen to forms at a certain moment, right? I think with my teenage kids, right, whichever Saturday Night Live cast you grew up on is the best Saturday Night Live cast. And it's the way our tastes take shape, that the formative becomes the normative. That's what's normal in our mind. Those are the sounds we download. Those are I can recount for you the infield of the LA Dodgers in the late 70s, early 80s, player by player, because those are my formative memories. And the formative becomes the normative, and because of the trick of nostalgia, whatever we think is normative gets into a hierarchy whereby it becomes better than what we are experiencing today. And so we shrug our shoulders and we say, oh, would it be that the music of today could be like the music that when we were growing up? Or the Saturday Night Live cast could be what it is. Would it be that we could go back to this day of yesteryear? This isn't an objective measurement. This is entirely subjective because our tastes form in an entirely subjective way at a certain slice of time, which is frozen by the trick of nostalgia and because human beings are human beings. And it's this yesteryear that becomes put on a pedestal, elevated above anything that we're experiencing right now. And it happens in music, it happens with the smells of our Shabbat table growing up, it happens with the sports teams that we listen to. It's why presidential candidates want to make America great again, right? Because if you are instituting change, the best way to do it, and by the way, this is also how rabbis work, you don't say, I'm changing something. You say, I'm bringing us back to a moment of yesteryear for which we all long. It's a rhetorical ploy, but it plays on a certain basic aspect of what it is to be human. We fear change. We want to go back to how things were, and that's just the way we are. It's actually a week and change before our Passover Seders. What makes a Passover Seder experience so powerful? Because the most important line of the Passover Seder is Chayav Adam lirot et atzmo ke'ilu hu yatsa mimitzrayim. We have to see ourselves as if we came out of Egypt. It's not just to imagine ourselves as liberated slaves. It's this incredibly democratizing moment that it doesn't matter if you are young or if you are old or if you are somewhere in between. At the Passover Seder, each one of us, we're not stratified by generation at that moment. Each one of us experienced that historical moment equally. That's the power of the Passover Seder, because it doesn't matter when you were born. We all experience that moment one and the same. It's our shared experience. And what I want to propose to you as we dive into the American-Israel relationship is that we do the exact same thing when it comes to Israel. The billing of this evening is to talk about the difficult issues when it comes to the American-Jewish relationship with Israel, as if there was once a time that there were no problems in the relationship, that right now we're on the precipice of an irreparable rupture between American Jewry and Israel that hitherto has never been experienced by the two communities. That we see an Israeli chief rabbinate running roughshod over American Jewry. We see the asphyxiation of a two-state solution. We see an American Jewry that's intermarrying, for whom Israel has less and less of a visceral hold, and an Israeli Jewry, secular or Haredi, that's increasingly dismissive of diaspora Jewry, and we throw up our hands and we say, "Oi, I remember the days of Federation lore when we are one was a slogan, when we marched on DC together, when we all stood hand in hand as if Golda herself is going to come out right here tonight and rally us together with Poalei Zion and the early Zionist movements." And we want to go back to that moment and cry, "Woe is me." And we say, what a bunch of ingrates American Jews are. They don't know. They don't know what it is to come out of the Shoah. They don't know the moment of 67. They don't know the moment of 73. They have no sense of the importance of the state of Israel built on the ashes of the Holocaust. And we wag our fingers at those who don't know what we know to be the case. So let me begin by saying what you can sense that I'm getting to, which is that when it comes to the relationship of American Jewry and Israel, it was never simple, and it's never been uncomplicated, and there have always been tensions between the two. If you read Francine Klagsburn new biography on Golda Meir, you will hear about those days, about the tensions, not just between the early Zionist groups and whether we were or weren't supportive in that pre-state moment of the State of Israel, but actually in the marriage itself between Golda and Morris, that the decision of whether you're going to Israel or not actually ripped at the very fabric of their marriage. And then in that pre-state time, it wasn't a foregone conclusion that American Jewry was supportive of the establishment of Israel. Orthodox Jewry saw political efforts to establish a state of Israel as untoward and a form of heresy. And the reform movement that had defined itself by way of ethical monotheism similarly shied away from an Israel, establishment of an Israel that was overly nationalistic in its formulation. And of course, there was a charge and the fear of dual loyalty. In this moment of World War I and otherwise, that a hyphenated American Jewry that somehow had loyalties elsewhere was a very complicated and charged issue for that moment of American Jews. That's what made Brandeis's leadership of the American Zionist organization such an important pivot that someone of his stature on the Supreme Court could become a leader also of American Zionism, to dismiss the charge of dual loyalty. And when the State of Israel was actually established, things didn't necessarily get better. The tensions remained. In 1948, right, conservative Jews love to pat themselves on the back and say, we're not like the Reform or the Orthodox, we've always been Zionists. It's actually not true. Louis Finkelstein, the chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary in 1948, had a very lukewarm relationship to Israel. He felt that, it was overly nationalistic. At graduation, the first year the State of Israel was in existence, the students asked that a flag of the State of Israel could be draped on the tower at the seminary. You probably know this story. And Finkelstein insisted that it be removed. They then went back to him and said, we would like Hatikva to be played at our graduation ceremony, which Finkelstein refused. At which point the students, in a form of protest, contracted the caroliner, the bell ringer, across the street at Union Theological Seminary and had the Hatikva played through the church bells as they walked down to graduate, much to their delight and Finkelstein's chagrin. But think about that. Think about that moment that the head of the conservative movement seminary refused to celebrate Israel at that moment, and it was the students who were insistent. There was a famous moment between David Ben-Gurion and the then head of American Jewry, a man named Blaustein, who was the head of the AJC. And at that moment, Ben-Gurion was, dismissive of the diaspora, saying that diaspora Jews should all come to Israel, and ironically, or interestingly, he was fundraising on the backs of American Jewry, the very ones who he was insisting should come to Israel. And Blaustein was telling Israel what they should do. And there was an emergency meeting between Ben-Gurion and Blaustein. And they agreed that never again would Ben-Gurion insist that American Jews make Aliyah or tell American Jews how they should act vis-a-vis Israel. And Blaustein promised that never again would American Jews say what is in the best interest of Israel, which is an agreement that's only interesting in the sense that it's never been observed by either party since it was made in the early 1950s. I remember when I was an intern at AIPAC in the early 90s, when Rabin excoriated AIPAC for pushing too hard on the loan guarantees. So whether it's AWACS, or whether it's the Oslo Accords, or the who's a Jew question, whether it's issues of identity or security, the first thing I want to get off the table is it's never been a simple relationship. It's always been complicated. And so if a person tells you that they want to make the relationship between American Jewry and Israel great again, just look them in the eye and say, it was never as great as you remember. And if someone says to you that this generation doesn't appreciate the fears of the generation of 73 or 68 or a world without a state of Israel, look at that person straight in the eyes and say, really? Is that the best you have? Is that your argument for the state of Israel, that the anti-Semites are coming to get us? When I was a kid, I grew up on the whole idea of Fackenheim's 614th commandment, that you had to be a Jewish as a posthumous thumbing of your nose at Hitler, right? That he didn't get the final victory. If I look at my nephew Zaki and I say, Zaki, right? Beware of the anti-Semites. That's why you need Israel. He and his friends will give you a blank stare. They have no idea what you're talking about. The argument for Israel cannot be based on some notion of the Shoah of Israel's existential threat, nor do we want it to be based on that. We live in a time of incredible blessing here in America, as well as in Israel that's a strong sovereign state, at peace, interestingly, with a growing number of its neighbors. And so given the choice of a sovereign and deeply imperfect state of Israel, or the moral purity of an exiled victimhood, I would pick the former over the latter any day of the week, and so should you. And also, finally, before I get going, if all we do is focus on what's bad, we miss out on what's good. So here's a test for you. Over the last 25 years, when some future historian talks about the last 25 years of American Jewry, what were the three most important institutions, change makers for Jewish identity in North America? Three. What would you say? Camp, day school. All right, birthright is one. What? Camping? Okay, Jewish camping. Okay, these are all good answers, and there's no, just spoiler alert, there's no one right answer. But I would say that the last 25 years, Chabad has totally changed the way Judaism is practiced in North America. But the two other ones have Israel at its center. Number one is birthright. 600,000 young Jews have found their Jewish identity by way of a trip to Israel. An extraordinary achievement that prior generations could not imagine. And number two, AIPAC. If you never had, whatever your politics are, go to the Verizon Center and see 18,000 people. It's the biggest kiddush in the world. And Israel is the focus of their identity. It's an expression of the civil religion of American Jews. And it has Israel at its center by way of activism and advocacy. Israel is taking on new expressions in our identity, whether it's the desalination plants that Seth Siegel talks about, whether it's Startup Nation, Haitian earthquake relief, Gal Gadot, even some of the difficult issues that Israel deals with. We see in Fauda, in Oslo. I just saw a new movie last week called Foxtrot. This is not the Entebbe saving, Nomi Shemer singing, kibbutz living Zionism that I grew up on. It's different. And it's more understandable to my children than it is to me. But to say that the relationship isn't evolving is to miss the tremendous opportunities which are taking place right before our very eyes when it comes to Israel and North American Jewry. But nevertheless, there are challenges. And let me list 4 of them. Number 1, and I made mention, an American Judaism that's not recognized by the Rabbanut of the State of Israel. Then we are also called on to support a very government who doesn't identify us, or me as a conservative rabbi, as Jews and Judaism. That when I take 450 of my congregants this December to Israel on a congregational mission, we will have to daven Kabbalat Shabbat in the Y across the street and not in the hotel in which we're all staying. Because to have musical instruments and men and women sitting together is reason enough to disallow us there. It's not just the Kotel. The Kotel is a canary in a coal mine. It is representative of much bigger problems that we can discuss. Number 2 is the curiosity of having woken up to or maybe this is also part of number one, an American administration that is more pro-Israel in its leanings than any other administration that I can remember, but whose policies on social issues are antithetical to the Torah of a liberal American Jewry. It was a very disorienting moment when I was at AIPAC 10 days ago, and I was listening to the vice president give what I thought was the most full-throated, positive speech on Israel, and I couldn't figure out whether to clap or not, because his views on women and LGBT issues and otherwise are so problematic in my mind. And so we deal with that problem, and we're figuring out how to reconcile a liberalism and a Zionism in this day and age, both with an American administration and with an Israeli administration. I think we live in a time where it's very difficult to give voice to pro-Israel sentiment all around, but on campuses especially. We think about BDS. We also think about the word of the moment, intersectionality. The Women's March earlier in last year, when one of the organizers, Linda Sarsour, said that one cannot be a feminist and a Zionist. That somehow you had to choose between one or the other. Or when those who are marching for Black Lives Matter have signs that say, from Ferguson to Palestine, occupation is a crime. We're caught, again, between the switches. And the final is within the Jewish community itself. That whether it's a reflection of social media, the age in which we live in, there's a toxicity to the conversation of vitriol between Jew and Jew when it comes to the state of Israel. That we've fallen into the trap of what philosophers call the black and white fallacy. You're either with us or you're against us. That if you don't show support for the Israeli government, then you're branded a self-hating Jew. Or every settler must be a human rights abusing colonialist, as if these are the only two options, and anyone who marches out of step is attacked viciously, and this has happened to me, for expressing anything with any texture or subtlety when it comes to the relationship of Israel and North American Jewry. Before I turn to the prescriptive elements, I do just want to point out that these are the symptoms, not the root cause. I think, again, when the historians look back on this moment, they're going to say that what we're seeing here is the emergence of two different Jewish communities. Right now, 86% of world Jewry lives either in North America or in the state of Israel. And the establishment of the State of Israel on May 14, 1948, was a rupture and realization of Jewish history that had vast consequences on these two communities as they developed in the 70 years henceforth. That for Israelis, or for Jews who had aspired, prayed for, longed for a State of Israel, in that sense, Israel was a realization of a long sought after goal. But it was also a rupture because up until that point, Jews never had to ask the question of what does it mean to have a state shaped and infused by Jewish values. You know, Ben-Gurion famously once said that his hope or dream of the State of Israel would be when Jews would have pickpockets, prostitutes, and policemen of their own, right? What does it mean to have an Israeli healthcare system? What does it mean to have a Jewish military? What does it mean to have a Jewish state with a minority that's not Jewish? Martin Buber once said that the challenge of the Jewish state is the question of balancing morality with power. And that is a project that Israel sometimes gets right and sometimes gets wrong. But they're in the process of figuring it out. And those are the terms by which the Israeli experience has been developing over the last 70 years. And American Jewry, it was the same rupture and realization when the state was established, but it was also a curveball, because American Jewry opted out of that moment of living in the state of Israel. On May 14, 1948, the word exile fell into disuse. We were no longer in exile. We could go on Orbitz or any travel website, and we can all get a ticket to live in Israel. So what exactly does it mean to support, engage, advocate, learn about a state of Israel that is not our own, that we are not citizens of that very state which makes a claim on us? Because the questions American Jewry wrestles with are these questions of how to balance the hyphenated identity of our particularism with our universalism, with our marriage choices, with our choices of religious expression. These are the questions of American Jewry, different questions of Israel. And so you have the emergence of two different communities. It's not a judgment, one's not better or worse, but no different than there was once a divide between Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews. I do think that right now we have an emergence of two different Jewries. And our project as a Jewish people is how to ensure, despite our varied contexts, how to retain a shared sense of peoplehood and identity. So what can we do? To the subject of tonight's lecture, how do we love an Israel? I don't see the flyer here, but something like, despite not liking all of its practices. So let me give you a few, I think 5. Number 1, start with love. A loving and learned relationship with Israel. Celebrate the good. As the song goes, how lucky we are to be alive right now. I don't want the problems of yesteryear any less than I want to live in a time where there was no penicillin. I choose these problems over past problems any day of the week. Start with the good. If APAC does it for you, if Birthright does it for you, if any of these programs that engender strong connection to Israel by way of religious, political, educational, what have you, build on that. And of course, we need to take Israel education more seriously in our communities. We need a Marshall Plan to restore the Zionist narrative to where it should be, not based on the Shoah, not based on anti-Semitism. It's hard enough to defend the Zionist narrative in a time of BDS, but all the more so if you don't know it. How to explain how a marginalized historic community, by way of grit and self-determination, were able to become the subject of their own sentence as opposed to the object of someone else's. That's a great story. And that's a story that our children and our grandchildren need to appreciate and celebrate, even in all of Israel's imperfections. That our children can be informed and self-confident, adroit defenders of the state of Israel. Number 2, we have to model a conversation. Andrea and Debbie took me to the store and they had this pillow, and on the pillow it said, "The best sermon is an example." Right? The sane center of the Israel conversation cannot abdicate to the voices on the far left or the far right. We can't point fingers at the generation to come. That gets us nowhere. We can't brand people with views different than our own as traitorous somehow. We have to reject the dichotomy, the false dichotomy, that Zionism and liberalism are somehow antithetical one to the other. When it comes to how we assess the choices that Israel makes, we have to recognize that the Middle East is not the Midwest, and it's certainly not the Upper East Side, that the definition of love is sometimes being able to stand with your partner, even when, and sometimes especially when, you don't agree with what they're doing. I think a little dose of humility is also in order when it comes to American Jewry's relationship with Israel. Second or third, that if you can model a conversation, if you can love and be learned about Israel, then don't be afraid to throw a flag on the field when you see Israel do wrong, if it's coming from a place of love. Believe you me that when Netanyahu reneged on the Kotel and conversion decision last summer, it was the fact that the AJC, the heads of the major Jewish organizations, got on a plane and told him that you will lose American Jewry if you push us too far away. And sure enough, he backed down at that moment. We may not have a vote, but we do have a voice in the conversation. Or if you like, read Ronald Lauder's op-ed this morning when the head of the World Jewish Congress, who has a close relationship with the Prime Minister of Israel, writes that he fears for Israel's future because he sees the death of a two-state solution. And Lauder's friendly also with the President of the United States. These are important gestures that we need to take seriously. Next, invest in an Israel that reflects your values. Don't just complain, do something. If feminism is important to you, then invest in those causes in Israel that help those efforts flower. If religious pluralism is important to you, then find those organizations that forward that mission. Partner with a community in Israel that is struggling to make ends meet because they don't receive government funding the way that Orthodox congregations do. Put your money where your values are. Help create a relationship with an Israel whose future reflects the values that reflect your best self, that reflect the Israel you would like to see. And finally, if you care, if you really care about the relationship between American Jewry and Israel, then spend a little less time worrying about Israel and more time worrying about your Judaism. Steve Cohen, the sociologist of American Jewry, wrote that the biggest question mark, dividing line between American Jews and Israel has nothing to do with this or that policy of this or that Israeli government. The litmus test is the relationship that American Jews have with their own Judaism. Sociologists talk about thick and thin Jewish identities. If you have a thick Jewish identity, and I'm not just talking about religious practice, I'm talking about engagement with Judaism, however you define an engaged Jewish life. If you have an engaged Jewish identity, a thick Jewish identity, it can weather any difference that there may be. And my fear is that for far too many American Jews, complaining about Israel has become a compensatory act for a paper-thin American Jewish identity. And in Israel, if you're wondering why the Rabbanut, or secular Jews even, and certainly religious Israelis, are running roughshod over American liberal Jews, it's because they see the writing on the wall. And they say, give it 1 or 2 generations, but then they're going to die out. And as where am I, in Wisconsin? Lombardi said, right? What was it? The best defense is a good offense, or the other way around, right? If you want to show someone, right, assert your identity loudly and proudly. That's the best response that you have as an American Jew. And so when I go to AIPAC, and I see an amazing thing. I've been involved, this isn't a knock at AIPAC, I've been involved with AIPAC since I was in early 90s. But I say to myself, if those 18,000 Jews at the Verizon Center were there not just to clap for Nikki Haley, but they were there to learn how to light Shabbos candles, then wouldn't American Jewry be stronger for it? Not that it's an either or, but that's the passion that we need. And so we need to do the one thing that is definitely in our power to do, which is to support those individuals and institutions that are committed to nurturing American Jewish life, to spend less time complaining about the Rabbanut, and more time supporting the efforts of your local rabbi, to spend less time worrying about the future of the two-state solution, and spend more time wondering if there'll be 2 candlesticks on your table this coming Shabbos. Keep kosher. Bring your kids to synagogue. Build community. Live a vibrant Jewish life. It's not going to make the tensions go away. And it's not an either or, but at least it will make it sure that your concerns about Israel are not about you and your American Judaism. Given the setting, given Israel's 70th, given that tonight is a night given over to women's leadership, I decided there's really only one way to finish my remarks. The enduring image of the most famous speech given by the most famous Zionist leader to come out of Milwaukee, Golda Meir. It was early 1948, exactly 70 years ago. In November of 1947, the UN partition plan had been voted on. It was accepted, as you may remember, by the Israelis and rejected by the Arabs, who unleashed a vicious and concerted attack on a Jewish community of Palestine at the hands of the Mufti. Golda flew to the United States on Ben-Gurion's behest in order to raise $25 million for the arms that were urgently needed to defend the 700,000 Jews in Palestine, and she made an unscheduled appearance before the Federation in Chicago. This is what she said, in part. We, Israelis, are not a better breed. We are not the best Jews of the Jewish people. It so happened that we are there and you are here. I am certain that if you were here in Palestine and we were in the United States, you would be doing what we are doing there, and you would ask us here to do what you will have to do. You cannot decide, Golda went on, whether we should fight or not. We will. That decision is taken. Nobody can change it. You can only decide one thing, whether we shall be victorious in this fight or whether the Mufti will be victorious. That decision American Jews can make. It has to be made quickly, within hours, within days. Golda was sent to raise $25 million. She raised $50 million. Ben-Gurion later wrote, Someday when history will be written, it will be said that there was a Jewish woman who got the money which made the state possible. The year is 2018. It's not 1948. Today is not then, and our problems are not theirs, and that is a very good thing. Only Israel can decide its destiny, but the decisions American Jewry makes will inform, shape, and perhaps determine Israel's success. So let's write a new song, or better yet, the next stanza of a song that, please God, will endure forever. American Jewry and Israel, like two strings on a violin, though separated by a distance, able to make a beautiful sound together. Thank you.
I will duly report into his mother that you all stood. And while we are
my mother-in-law.
Yeah, that too. But I figured your mom would want to know even more. Actually, as we're collecting questions, I'm going to tell a story about a different Wisconsin connection, speaking of in-laws. So you might recall that Archbishop Dolan, late of Milwaukee, then became Cardinal Dolan when he moved to New York. And it was Elliot's pleasure to welcome him on behalf of the Jewish community at the synagogue at Park Avenue. And as he was doing this in the ceremony, at one point, Cardinal Dolan met my parents and leaned over to my dad and said, "You know, behind every successful man," and my dad leans in and he goes, "What?" He goes, "is a shocked father-in-law." Cardinal Dolan is a good friend, but let me say, on behalf of all the in-laws, I'm not at all shocked by your performance tonight. We are delighted and pleased. So I get to run questions, and you can feel free to raise your hand at this point, hand over a card. Anything you'd like to ask him? It only takes one of you to get started. There we go. Sir, yes.
I have a lot to say about intermarriage. So the question was, I mentioned Chabad, Birthright, and AIPAC, and I didn't mention intermarriage. So I would say the intermarriage, what I was trying to do is name those institutional arms, not so much those trends in American Jewry, by way of identifying those three institutions. Much in the same way that I'd say in, another moment in time. Anyway, so that's what I meant by then. I think it would take us into I'm happy to talk about intermarriage, but that's a slightly different topic.
Yes.
First of all, your talk was absolutely magnificent. My question is, you very briefly touched on our college campus. And I think it needs a little more time. Many of our children on college campuses are being attacked by their pro-Israeli stand. Unfortunately, we're not talking about Christian or Muslim. You know who I'm talking about. What can be done about it?
Here locally, I would say, here locally, I would say that if you have children or grandchildren who are on their way to college, that it should be that effort. I mean, I don't want to get disinvited, but so I have no idea what Federation priorities are, but I would say that teaching our children a Zionist narrative, the history of the State of Israel, being able to explain the reason and rationale for a State of Israel independent of the Holocaust or the anti-Semites are going to come to get us is a critical part of what I would say, not necessarily little kids, but high school education in a pre-college track. And I think that once we are able, if you are financially able, to support those individuals in the community who are on the front lines, whether that's Hillel Direct. I just took a meeting with someone who is running a new organization called Zioness, whose sole purpose is to put female feminist leadership front and center on the issue of Zionism. What an important, extraordinary organization that is. And whether it's on campus or elsewhere, to give our children and grandchildren the tools to defend the state of Israel and have their stance not seem at odds with the liberalism that might be on college campuses.
Yeah.
When a recent study was done, I believe in 2016, of millennials, everybody's worried about millennials. What was shocking to me, as the child of a Holocaust survivor, what was shocking to me in the 2016 survey of millennials was that Israel, and the question was, what is most important to your Jewish identity? Israel was number 8. And the first one was remembering the Holocaust, which is an additional angle. I mean, if I totally loved everything you had to say and the way you said it, how do we deal with the fact they have a hunger to participate in the memory of the Holocaust?
I think, did everyone hear? I think it's a very important question. It's a delicate question because you would never, because as sure as I am that I can say, Zionism, Judaism doth not equal Zionism. Judaism definitely doth not equal the remembrance of the Shoah. I wouldn't ever want to be heard or thought that I had suggested that never again that we remember the Shoah is not a critical building block of who I am as a Jew and otherwise. I think, and I'll just say it anecdotally from the community I serve and in my own household, I do think we're living in a moment where my families are very aware that the generation of the Shoah is dying. And I think something has triggered in the consciousness of teenagers. We have a great program in New York called Witness Theater, a pairing program between teenagers and Holocaust survivors, of which there are a diminishing number, whereby the narratives are passed down and then dramatized between the generations. And I think that awareness that the clock is ticking has triggered a desire to engage with Holocaust memory, not because a typical teenager, though Zachy, I'll defer to you, I don't think a typical teenager in Milwaukee or New York is fearing A, the Shoah, or B, anti-Semitism in that raw way. But I think that you're right, Hannah, that there is something in the air right now, that there's sort of a desire to engage with Holocaust remembrance that I don't think was there 10 years ago.
All right, I have a question here to read off. There seems to be a new era, indeed, in which the organized Jewish community, JFNA, others, are criticizing Israeli policy. Do you see this as a sign of a larger split between the Jewish and Israeli communities? Are you worried about that at all? Or is that a good thing?
I think criticism from a place of love is important. I think criticism, I could be talking about my marriage. I could be talking about your marriage. I could be talking about anything.
We're done here.
That for me, what enables me to throw what I said, throw a flag on the field, is because we have an entire year of celebrating Israel. Because now the numbers in New York are different, but because we have the largest congregational mission that I think is on record of 450 members going to Israel this December, because we take a delegation to AIPAC, because we do A, B, C, and D. I feel that my bona fides as a passion-filled advocate for the state of Israel are established. And so when I or JFNA or otherwise expresses dissatisfaction or concern, or when Ron Lauder writes an op-ed saying, I think the last line, I don't have it off by memory, but the last line basically communicates that it's because of my love for Israel that's prompting me to write this op-ed. I think that's very important, and that's a voice that Israel needs to hear and can be effective, as evidenced from the events of last summer.
What's your feeling about right-wing politicians with whom you probably disagree on every issue but appreciate their support of Israel? You've kind of started talking about that. How do you continue to deal with that?
I struggle with it. You know, a colleague of mine told me to get over myself, that this is the way politics work, that you create alliances with people on issues of which you have common cause, even if you find their stance on other issues to be objectionable or even anathema to you. And that's just the way the world works. That there's no presumption that I agree with you on everything, but if you and I can work together on issue X, then we should. And so we walk around with this purist vision, because I was having trouble at the AIPAC conference, because I was having this disorienting feeling that what the ambassador was saying, what the vice president was saying, I quite liked it. And I had to sort of step outside of myself and say, whoa, wait, I don't like so much about this administration. But I think I need to learn how to work together on issues of common cause. It was, the deafening silence on the Jerusalem moment for American Jewry a few months ago was a fascinating observation. It was a fascinating moment. The liberal American Jewry could not bring itself to applaud the decision of the Trump administration to embrace Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Right? For like 30 different reasons, that's a hands-down good and belated decision. But because of the moral gymnastics we're all doing, we couldn't bring ourselves. So I think we have to be very thoughtful and tactical about how we move forward with relationships with people with whom we agree on a lot, but not everything. How's that?
From the audience.
You can give them the mic.
Thank you. To what extent do you attribute the divide between America and Israel to, where's the overlap between the divide between, let's just say, the ultra-religious and people who are not ultra-religious? You mentioned the rabbinate, like the chief rabbinate, and it seems that they're taking more and more ultra-orthodox perspectives and voices are being heard. to what extent do you think that's contributing to the divide? Is the divide maybe perhaps something at a root level, more of a religious divide, and something we're going to face more increasingly given the demographics changing in Israel?
I think I'm baffled a little by what goes on in Israel as an American, and I have to remind myself that I don't live in Israel because I, as a conservative rabbi, obviously find so much of to be objectionable about what goes on in terms of church and state and the rabbinate in Israel. But I ask myself, why aren't secular Israelis erupting over it? There are hundreds of thousands of Russian immigrants to Israel who have arrived, can fight and die on behalf of the Jewish state, but can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery because they're not considered Jewish by the Rabbanut, and they certainly can't get married by the Rabbanut. And the number of secular Israelis who go to Cyprus or elsewhere or just opt out of marriage altogether because of the power of the Rabbanut. And so I look at it and I say, why is it only American Jews who are complaining about where are my secular Israelis complaining about this? And I think you're right, sir, that gets into sort of this deep, curious question about how Israelis view religion, right? We joke about being members of a shul that we would never walk into, or whatever that joke is, about the man who was found on the desert island and there were 3 shuls, and they said, you were here for 20 years, why are there, or why are there 2 shuls? And he says, well, that's a shul I go to, and that's a shul I would never walk into. Israelis clearly have a sense of the rabbinate that I would never go to is the chief rabbinate, a Haredi rabbinate, in spite of, and the notion we have of some sort of Jeffersonian democratic notion, right? We would never have a chief rabbi. It's a different system, it's a different culture, and it needs to be figured out. So thank you, it's an important question.
All right, I've got another one here for you. You quoted Golda Meir that it is for the Israelis to make the decisions for the state and for us to support. But is it not appropriate for us in America with a shared concern to assert our views, whether for the two-state solution or religious constraints, as pointed out by Lauder in the op-ed? So again, back to the balance of when we get to say stuff versus not.
So in good rabbinic fashion, I'm trying to have it both ways, right? All the more so as a conservative rabbi. We need to recognize that we're not citizens of Israel. If you want to impact policy and as a citizen of the state of Israel, do what Jews wanted to do for thousands of years. Make Aliyah, move to Israel. No one's stopping you. But the fact that you haven't definitionally limits your ability to impact policy in the state of Israel. And that's exactly how it should be. And so I think a little humility on the part of American Jewry is in order. But there's nothing stopping you from supporting those organizations that advocate for a two-state solution, that look for opportunities for Arab-Israeli cooperation, who are interested in religious pluralism. I assure you that it's the loud voices on the side, right? Jewish Voices for Peace on the extreme left and Sheldon Adelson on the right, right? They're involved, they're engaged, they're making their voices heard. It's all of us here in this room, what I call the sane center, who are kind of shrugging our shoulders and saying, it's unfortunate. Put your money where your mouth is. Invest in those efforts that you'd like to see succeed in the state of Israel. That's how you can make a difference, even if you can't vote.
Yes, sir.
You don't really need one. Anecdotally, it seems many Israelis do not respect liberal democracy in the United States.
Can you give me just one something to illustrate that?
Well, in traveling around Israel and talking to a lot of liberal Israelis, they don't seem to understand and appreciate how important liberal democracy is. Vis-a-vis Obama, the kinds of things that he tried to do, the environment, I don't think that the Israelis in their heart really appreciate how important that is.
So the question, I don't mean, I don't mean that, no, I'm not saying the question, the snarky thing I want to say back is, my fear is that Americans don't value
I think
liberal democracy right now the way we should. I'm less worried about Israel than I am about America right now.
Well, I think the example of the kind of lack of liberal democracy we have right now, and the fact that many Israelis celebrate, is a big problem. It may be presently a good thing for Israel, but I think it's a bad thing for the country and in the world.
Well, here I would say that I think the coarsening of discourse in America and also in Israel is deeply concerning. In the news today or yesterday, there was the news. You remember about 6 months ago, an Israeli soldier, Elior Azaria, shot a Palestinian to death while he was already on the ground, and it got in the news today because his sentencing was, when it shortened, what's that called, commuted further, and he'll be paroled in weeks or months. A full, I think the number was in the high 60% of Israelis polled didn't believe that he should have been punished at all. I don't have the exact statistic, but, and so perhaps, sir, that's what, maybe a bit of what we're getting at, of a hardening of the Israeli soul and us versus them. Again, the Middle East is not the Middle West, so that dose of humility is important, but it is a trend that concerns me too.
So, thank you. I would love to hear the shortened version of the story that you want us to be able to tell about Israel, and especially as it refers to millennials. I would actually come out and identify myself as a Reconstructionist rabbi, and what's very interesting is that as like the only American movement that evolved actually as Israel was evolving, the graphic of the movement has Israel as its center. And yet in 2018, most of the rabbinic cabinet of JVP is Reconstructionists. And I think that's because of a very, very deep values-based understanding of our Jewish lives. I see the same thing in millennials. It comes up with intermarriage. They don't have that sense of identity, it's intersectionality. They live and want to live in a diverse, raceless, genderless, label-less world, or at least all those should be multifaceted. So if we take away the Shoah and we take away anti-Semitism, what is the story that can appeal to them, let alone, our children who are in their teens or, in grade school? What is the story that appeals to these younger people?
The right for self-determination. That Jewish people, defined not merely as a religion or an ethnicity or otherwise, has every right to be a free people in its own land, no different than any other community, and that we have taken it upon itself, as I said earlier, from being a historically marginalized people by way of the efforts of the first, second, third waves of immigration to become the subjects of our own sentence as opposed to the objects of someone else's. The problem is that that project comes at the expense with another community's competing claim to that same right of self-determination. And and we're caught betwixt and between as to how to reconcile those competing value systems. What I would say to my millennial imagined friend is to think of all the values that you hold dear, right? As American liberal Jews, we have a certain Torah that we believe in when it comes to gender and when it comes to equal rights, when it comes, right? And we could list them all out and say, if you believe in these values, then Israel is your best hope in the Middle East for these values. I will be the first one to point out Israel's imperfections, right? It's not a perfect state. It's far from it. But those imperfections, right, we live in this moment where somehow if we find something about something, an aspect of something to be objectionable, we therefore need to distance ourselves from the entirety of the project. And I don't think that's intellectually sound. And so I think having an honest conversation about the narrative of Israel and its existence, where it gets things right, where it gets things wrong, and working towards, these are my politics, a two-state solution that seeks to create an Israel that is both a Jewish and democratic state. I think that's something worth fighting for.
That's the last question. I hate the evening to end. We could go on and on. But we're going up there.
She has something for me to say. I want to thank you so much again for coming and sharing your views, and I can honestly say that you've said some things tonight that I have not heard before, and I have not thought about that way, and I pay attention. So I'm very grateful to have new things to think about. We have a down-to-earth Midwestern gift for you, which is a Milwaukee mug. So you can remember your time in the spirit of our personality.
There you go. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And again, thank you, everybody. And please stay with us for dessert and Israeli wine. Oh, okay. Please remember and feel invited to come to the fourth session of Hot Topics for Cold Nights. Fourth session series of discussion of robust and civil conversations about Israel. So, and I apologize, I'm not good at on the spot doing it right. So is this a conversation or a video series? Okay, conversation.
Right. And
Excellent.
I believe, right, and I want to just, right, so it's Destined to Live Together, Looking Ahead to the Possibilities of Coexistence, this Thursday night, 7 p.m. at the J, sponsored by the JCRC, Israel Center, JCC. Alana is at the back with any questions that you might have. So, join me in thanking my lovely brother-in-law for flying out here and playing a good job. Thanks, sweetie.